And welcome back, everybody, to the Titans of Today podcast. This is Jacob Vandersteen, episode 36 here. We have Noah Sanborn Friedman, co-founder and managing partner of Top Shelf Ventures. Welcome to the show, Noah.
Thanks, Jacob, for having me. Good to be here.
Absolutely. Now, we had a pretty interesting conversation covering a broad array of things in our initial pre-call to this. And just so people can get a deeper understanding of your career path to where you're at today as a young fund owner who's investing in the alcohol industry. How did you get there? What were some of the steps that you took?
Well, let's see. How did I get there? The origin story flows fairly heavily through Loeb Enterprises and a gentleman named Michael Loeb, who's become a big mentor and partner of mine. I started my career with him actually when I was an undergrad in college. I was working for him I think I started when I was 19. And he, for those of you who don't know Michael Loeb, he's built several multi-billion-dollar companies. He tends to churn out a unicorn every couple of years, either as investing early or starting it himself with his partner, Rich Vogel. And I was lucky enough that they took me under their wing when I was 19 and gave me a healthy dose of exposure and autonomy. What it really was them throwing me into the deep end and seeing if I could swim, right? These are two guys who believe, I think, heavily in meritocracy and in the merits of entrepreneurship and capitalism. And I guess I proved myself to them early on in a way that gave me continuous at-bats to do bigger and better things with them. And it resulted in, by the time I graduated college, I had worked in a, fairly senior and exposed venture associate position and kind of had a couple years of venture and entrepreneurial experience vis-a-vis exposure to people who were doing it at a big scale. And so I graduated college and kind of jumped right into more of a junior executive position, working across the portfolio before settling in at Michael's request to helping launch, start, and run a business that just so happened to be in the alcohol analytics realm, right?
Mm-hmm.
I knew nothing about alcohol as an industry other than the fact that it was big and that George Clooney had just sold Casamigos for $1 billion. So I was intrigued. And as I dived into this industry of booze and helped start this company that ended up processing, largely off the backs of the work we and my team that I hired did in scaling a retail network, processing billions of dollars of receipt level transaction data, my big epiphany was that alcohol was a massive, massive space, as I said, but more importantly, that there was a huge white space in the capital and capital markets nature of the booze industry. What I mean by that specifically is that there's a lot of money in alcohol categorically and on a macro, and there's a lot of money changing hands constantly, but there's not a lot of smart money from an investment and private equity standpoint, right? This is an industry that does hundreds of billions of dollars a year. The large manufacturers, their business model is largely built on their ability to continue to own relevant brands, which means that they have to be continuously doing M&A. And in the early stage markets, and even in the growth and PE later stage markets of alcohol and alcohol brands and alcohol businesses in general, much of the capital there is coming from a kind of disparate and fragmented sources. So we saw an opportunity to fix that. And so we started that fund a few years ago. And around the same time, Michael and I started hosting these dinners at his townhouse, largely just to bring together our most impressive and entrepreneurial friends. And those dinners have, I'm giving the short version here, those dinners have become a business that is now called Uncharted. And it's a community of a few thousand people who gather in, we like to say, extraordinary places, but more so in containers we create that are conducive to very intentional conversation amongst high caliber people. So that's the long and short of how we got here. But, right now I have a great team that helps me run Uncharted and scale that into what we think can be a pretty important community business. And then I run Top Shelf Ventures, which, our intent and plan, and I think current trajectory would indicate, hopefully is going to continue to become a multi-billion-dollar fund franchise that is strong and dominating in the consumer and beyond sector. And then I do some personal investments and help start companies with all my spare free time.
Mm-hmm. And there's probably 5 or 6 things that I want to ask you about there. One of them just to touch on, and then we'll back to the next step question is, as I was preparing for this interview, I'd looked into some of your content recently, the series of, your investments and the things. Approach those investments. You mentioned the qualitative and the quantitative factors. So I can sense that by, going and working at this alcohol analytics industry company was probably one of the best things you could have gotten exposed to then go and want to, invest in the company because you get to learn it from the inside. So what was that like, having that opportunity? How did you get really in the room with Michael though? Because let's say they're in college.
Yeah.
They have drive. I mean, what was it that really put you in that room? Was it just knowing that you wanted to be in that industry? Was it connections, relationships? I mean,
Yeah.
and how could someone replicate that? Because it puts you on a fantastic path.
The story of how I met Michael specifically was, and then I'll give a more kind of macro version of, I think, the principles that apply for people who may be young and ambitious and listening right now. I met Michael because when I was an undergrad in college, I was working and helping start a app business. We didn't really know what we were doing, but we got some traction on our college campus. And I saw on TechCrunch, which I read every day, that there was this entrepreneurial boot camp that was taking place in New York City that was application only, but was funded and sponsored if you were accepted by the partners of this organization, where basically you would go to some office in New York City and for 2 days you'd have intensives on how to start companies, how to scale, legal, et cetera. And I applied and I was accepted, and I was the youngest person there who ended up going. And one of the sponsors of this thing was Michael Loeb, who sponsored and hosted the closing cocktail party at his house that we now host the Uncharted dinners at. And I remember walking into the house, reading up on his background and being not only blown away, but inspired and motivated by what I was seeing, that this was a guy who had accomplished, obviously creating huge amounts of wealth for himself and importantly, other people, but that his job and career now was basically starting, funding, scaling, and deploying himself and his capital into things he found interesting, which was very motivating to me in terms of like, if I could ever get to that point, that's exactly where I want to go. So I just made a point to go shake his hand when I was in his townhouse, right? I was the youngest person there. So I think I had the advantage of standing out. I probably was at least 5 or 10 years younger than anyone else in the room. And to be honest with you, Jake, the only thing I said when we shook hands is I was like, Michael, I'm not going to talk business tonight because I know people are talking your ear off, but it's been an honor to be here. The only thing I ask of you is when I email you, which I will, do me a favor and remember the name and remember the face. And he said, okay, fair enough. And I emailed him, and sure enough, he was willing to give me 15 minutes of his time. So I drove back down from school a couple of weeks later to talk to him in his office. The 15-minute meeting became an hour. And by the end of the meeting, he was like, why don't you intern for me? And I was like, what does an intern at Loeb do? He's like, I don't have no idea, but just start on Monday and we'll figure it out. And that's kind of his style of just like, if he likes someone, if he believes in them, he'll throw them into the deep end. I think I started 2 weeks later or a week later. So what's the lesson and the principle for young, ambitious people who want to try to take the third door or the third path and accelerating their career, or at the very least getting exposure? I think the common thread is, number one, you need to have the combination between the confidence, or more so the ability to navigate the system, but more so the willingness to put in the work. Meaning, if you get yourself an at bat, you need to be willing and ready and able to pounce and work and prove yourself quickly. And that applies really at any stage of career, right? Whether you're working in a big firm and you want a shot at the promotion or to take over the firm one day, whether you're a young undergrad looking for an opportunity to intern someone or shadow someone, or whether even you're later in career, right? Even the people at the most senior level, people who are being considered for CEO, et cetera, a lot of that goes into like, what's the work you have done to set yourself up to be successful if you're called upon? And so I think for the people that are listening that are younger and looking for their opportunities, it's like, number one, how do I make damn sure that I, in this very moment, have done the preparatory work to make sure that if I get in at bat, I'm ready to pounce? And that pouncing may just be that you're willing to work harder than anyone else. Sometimes that's enough, depending on what you're trying to do, right? I think people like me somewhat appreciate raw talent that just wants to work, right? That's moldable and refinable. I've often, some of the best hires I've ever made are people who they thought they wanted to do something else. They come work with me, and, a year later, they are an absolute weapon because we refined their just raw horsepower and skill sets into like a pointed, tactical, really dangerous killers in the spaces that we're building in. And so I think, number one, be ready to be that, be ready to be coached, be ready to be mentored, and be ready to work your ass off. And then the second part becomes, how do you get the at bat, right? And to be honest, that is really just an exercise in like, where do you need to put yourself to be seen? And what do you need to do to stand out to get the opportunity? A very specific example, I am, Top Shelf is bringing on some part-time support consultants right now to help with some of our work. And I posted on my Instagram story. I don't have a big Instagram following by design, right? I haven't really intended to grow it yet, but some people have just found me and supposedly find what I do interesting. And I posted on my Instagram story, hey, looking for some part-time support at Top Shelf. Does anybody know someone who's hungry and wants to work 5 to 10 hours a week? And I got probably 70 DMs from people that I'd never heard of, and people I have no idea how they found me, but they did. And some of them followed up 3 and 4 times to make sure that I would actually meet them and take the meeting. That's the type of hustle that you
Yeah.
need to do, because, you know, the chances are, and this is not to say that I'm going to make their career, but I might, honestly, right? The right person who impresses me might have a life-changing opportunity to work within the things I'm doing and accelerate themselves and beyond. There was a few, I hate to say kids, but kids who DM'd me 3, 4 times, DM'd me on Twitter, found my LinkedIn, messaged me on LinkedIn, emailed me directly. And they're one of the like 7 or 8 that I actually took Zooms with and now have a written exercise with, right? So that's the type of stuff that applies of like, where do you find not only the asymmetry and like getting the people's attention, but also getting good stuff in front of them, right? The internet is a very powerful tool. I also think there's a lot of value in just showing up and getting yourself noticed. But a lot of this is just like, can you execute? Simple as that sounds, really the game is execution. So that was the Michael story. And I think there's a lot of lessons in there for young, hungry kids today.
For sure. And then even to go a step back from that is, when did your entrepreneurial drive develop? Because one of the key parts, you said you were creating an app company, and a lot of people don't
Yeah.
take that step. And I think the ones that do have 1 or 2 or 3 formative moments that occur before
Yeah.
really put themselves in that first, I'm going to start a company position.
Yeah.
That they form an idea about themselves and say, this is me because I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to put myself in these areas. So there's a very interesting part there. And then the other is, you talk about navigating and working the system. So obviously you talk as well about the persistence, these people following up many times.
Yeah.
I think one thing that you said there that really resonated is you went up and you went straight to Michael. And I remember in the earlier stages of my career, I had some really great people who trained me how to sell and get in this organization, but they left. They actually left to live their dreams, literally. Like they said, hey, we're in this company. I was a young guy at the time.
Yeah.
And the new managers that came in, they were more financially and operationally driven, and a real, it's a sales organization. And they're like, yep, whatever you do, just keep doing your work, but don't go talk to the district manager. His name, I think it was Jim or something like that. And so there is a system, and a lot of people that are listening to this probably are in that system already. So we're kind of getting hit from both sides. There's people who are in the system developing that entrepreneurial drive, but then there's people in the system that they don't know how to move up. So let's start with that entrepreneurial drive. Were there moments that occurred for you prior to starting the app that made you say,
yeah, definitely.
This is who I am?
I think when I was going into school, so when I was exiting high school and entering college, I had a few mentors who I would say started to show me the path that looked like not just going into banking or consulting. I even in high school and from a young age, I think was pretty dead set that I wanted to try to be successful and, to be frank, make a lot of money. Like that was always a part of my like 50-year plan. It was like, I want to be able to take care of my family and create generational wealth for my family. And just being honest, like that was always one of the true North goals. Important in that is like not losing myself and becoming an intolerable, drone of someone who's just like miserable. Like I always wanted to be happy, but I like chasing cool stuff. I like making money. It's exciting to me. And so I think at an early age, I knew that I wanted that. I always assumed that the path to do that, meaning like, Noah 14 to like 18 in those formative years was like, I'll go to banking and I'll work hardest and I'll be consulting. And I'm just like, I'm going to rise up the ranks and maybe I'll be like CEO of Goldman Sachs one day. Good path to make a lot of money, to be clear. I didn't really know because I hadn't had the exposure that there was like other paths to doing that, right? I grew up with entrepreneurial parents, but dad's an actor and mom's a therapist who built their own career. So I understood that like there were paths you could take to build your own things, but I didn't know that in the sense of like full on business, like starting startups and bootstrapping companies. Like it was a little bit of a different framing. So I just hadn't had exposure. And then as I was going into college, I started to get some of that exposure from a few of my dad's friends in particular who were like chasing entrepreneurial journeys, running their own companies. And I was like, I saw them like making money and they had cars. And I was like, what do you do? Like you don't work at a bank and you have a Porsche. Like, how does that happen? Like, walk me through that stuff. And then I started to understand that there was this whole journey of like, whether it was tech startups or startups in general, or more so just like building your own things that you start and you put your name on. I started to see that as a path to like, okay, maybe that's a viable option. So as I got into college, I had kind of been awoken to the notion that there was, for those who could actually kind of like trailblaze and at least walk down with some level of confidence, a path that was less walked. I mean, certainly less walked by most people who are young undergrads who want to go into business. I just started to get more and more interested in that. And I think I got obsessed when I was in school with just like what the tech startup ecosystem looked like at the time, right? I was in college from 2013 to 2017. I graduated undergrad in 2017. It's 2016, 2017. Those were some pretty interesting years in tech. It was kind of like one of the booms of the modern tech VC movement was happening at that time. Uber had kind of like just launched and was just getting big. And so I just got really interested in like seeing all the money that was flowing into this. And more importantly, that there were these guys and girls who were starting these things and guys and girls who were starting venture capital funds and were able to like deploy capital into lots of different things. I had no idea how it worked. I had no idea what it meant. I knew none of the actual structural components of how these things actually worked. I just found it interesting. And so I think those formative years as I was in college, and I'm very grateful for this because, the school that I went to, as great as it was, tends to breed accountants and consultants, which are great, but it's just like, that was never going to be me. And so I'm very grateful that when I was going into school, I was able to have at least some level of like awakening that there was other options that, it was difficult when I was in college because, and, I hope someone from my school is listening so that they fix this. It's a great school with amazing people, but they do not breed any path for the most part that's not by the books, right? And so it was a little painful to be one of the very few people there. Not to say there weren't others, and certainly are others who've come out of that school that have done amazing entrepreneurial things. But in that moment, in that framework, there's just not much going on, right? Like if you're interested in talking with buds about starting a company, it's just like that doesn't exist there. So it was hard and difficult, and like the path was not primed for me to walk down. I kind of just had to go like muster through the forest and try to figure it out. So that was the real foray into it, is getting awoken that there were other paths that I could actually try to trailblaze a life that would be meaningful to me and exciting and do it on my own terms, which has always been kind of a core tenet for me of like operating by my own principles and not just following the path that is laid out in front of you, but carving one that you find compelling, interesting, and exciting.
Mm-hmm. And then, so we talked in our initial conversation as well about your physical training, and you did an Ironman.
Yeah.
How did you, to go one step further on that, how did you avoid the rhythm of the others around you in the university and stay your own path? Where there was a specific way you were living, set up habits? Did that physical training, did it help you? Because I find sometimes there's often parallels, like you're saying, the drive and the desire to develop yourself. And that a lot of people who do Ironman are successful, right? They've kind of crafted a path for themselves. Did you have those habits back then, or were there other things you were doing, or you were just so driven by that single, trying to figure out how you got your life to that point that, the things around you just stopped to matter until you figured that out?
The things around me definitely didn't not matter. I definitely was subject to the insecurity and anxiety and self-doubt that comes with trying to do things that most of your people around you aren't doing. So like, I definitely felt that. And, one of the things that I continue to work on both personally and in therapy and like, all the self-talk, self-development things is like, how do I continuously try to drop those voices? They're not any one voice in particular, but just the feeling of like, am I doing the right thing? Is it weird to be someone doing something different? Is this all going to work? Should I just follow the path that others are? Should I just get in line more?
Yeah.
So that's absolutely, those were, I'm grateful because I think it probably gave me some level of like conviction and thicker skin to be okay doing something a little bit different. But certainly, look, I always have deep admiration for people who are just, violently out there pursuing their thing with no care whatsoever for what the world thinks. I'm getting there. And, I think now that I'm starting to put out more content and some of my stuff is a little bit more public, I have people telling me like, it's really cool to just see you putting yourself out there and saying your message. I'm like, man, if only you knew the journey it's been to get here. And if only you knew the fact that I still wake up every day when I have to post and I'm like, oh God, like it's so, I'm just, I have to give a lot of credit. One of my very good friends is Sahil Bloom, who's built an amazing, not only audience, but business out of just being publicly online. And that's not to say that he doesn't do more than that. I just mean like his ace in the hole is his content. It's amazing stuff. And he's mentored me and guided me through this process. And one of the sentences he said that I will never forget, and I still try to keep top of mind, is he was like, brother, you have to delete the word cringe from your vocabulary. It is not serving you. It is tremendously unproductive. And any specific anecdotal thought patterns you have that lead you to believe that you're cringe, are rooted in something that's fear-driven, unproductive, and unhelpful. And so I still work through that. I think I'm getting better. I give a ton of credit to Sahil and a lot of gratitude for him for like helping me get over the hump to even take a leap and start to post stuff online, because it's already, in my early days of the content journey, it's already had remarkable impacts on both my personal life and, more importantly, my professional life, in terms of what it's doing to bring the right attention and people into the ecosystems of Top Shelf, Uncharted, and just Noah and beyond. So it's a powerful framing to just delete the word cringe from your vocabulary.
Mm.
But back to the point that I was saying before, yeah, it was definitely hard in school to do that, but I'm glad I did it, because I just don't think I'd be happy working for a large corporation. That's just not me. I'm unfortunately or fortunately, I guess there's still a world where all the stuff I'm doing crashes and burns, and that would suck. But I still don't think there's a world where I could go work for a big company and forever and be thrilled. I just, I'm too motivated by breaking things in a good way and trying to do things on my own terms and working quickly and lean with people that I like. And more importantly, just building stuff. I'm so addicted to it and so motivated by it. So, I'm still early in this game, but I'm hopefully and trying to just convince myself continuously based on my gut that I'm walking down at least a pretty good path.
Right. No, for sure. And obviously the results and the successes and the things help, no doubt. And that's great to be that you spoke really to the realities of a lot of the things that
Yeah.
people, entrepreneurs face, putting yourself out there, being in a different place than everyone else, doing things differently, thinking differently. But you mentioned a very powerful word there, and that's conviction. And obviously what you just communicated there demonstrates that continued
Yeah.
conviction that, you know what, even if it happened, even if something horrible happened, I'm going to keep going. You're going to keep going,
Yeah.
find that thing. And then it's that conviction that carries into making sure that you're successful. So it's like the devil and the God on our shoulder, right? Or whatever, however you
Totally.
frame it, that thing inside of us. So I'm right there with you. And then one part that you mentioned about the content creation and publishing, I don't think that gets enough talk as well. Just the way that every day you're pushing through those hurdles of
Yeah,
those.
definitely.
But then also when you talk to successful people, like you're saying, like Sahil, I'm saying that right?
Yep.
Yeah, that little insight. Hey, just get that word cringe out of your vocabulary. It seems like a small tip, but
Yeah.
it's usually those small tips, and you just stick with them.
Yeah.
You know what? If I just get that word out of my head, and I just focus on realizing that, the what you're putting out there is valuable, you're helping people, and everything like
Yeah.
that. Another mindset thing I had about this recently was that when you're scrolling through content, it almost never does it go through my head like, oh, this person looks stupid. It's like, hey,
And
someone.
even if it does, it's like, good for them, man. Like, I don't know. I think, there's like, I think I think it's dead on that anybody who is choosing to actively spend their own cycles, people are trying to bring someone else down based on things they're putting out online, that they're doing either because they like it or because they find it interesting or because they think it's going to be beneficial to them, to take mental cycles out of your day or actual time out of your day to like think about how much you don't like it and how much it's just sad, man. It's just like,
Mhm.
it doesn't help anybody. It's so unproductive. As a matter of fact, I'd say for that person specifically, it can be tremendously counterproductive. And God forbid you start to do something where you're commenting on it or sending it around and it actually stops that other person from posting more. Like, it's pathetic, honestly. Like, unless they're causing harm and putting out negative things, which that's a different story. If they're putting out stuff that is positive and that they think is helping them or that they find interesting, like, good for them, man. Let them rock. It's cool. It's
Agreed.
admirable.
Agreed. Yeah, the point of that was really just the difference between, in our own minds, it's the creator versus the consumer. The consumer often, again, doesn't
Yeah.
doesn't really judge. Again, you're right. There are people that do judge, but that internal voice that we have that might want to suppress our content creation or
Yep.
putting ourselves out there is
Yep.
normally stronger than many will face out in the real world. But
100%. That's exactly right. I think, look, the theme there, negative voices stick around and often feel much louder than positive voices to us. A good example, and I suffer from this as well, I'm working on it. If I get 1,000 compliments in a day, most of them go right over my head. I brush them off and I don't internalize them, right? Someone says it, it's gone. If someone goes to me and says, I hate what you're doing, you suck, this is stupid, and you're an idiot, I'm going to be like, well, that's stuff. And it's certainly going to stick in my brain for a second longer. Now I'm working on that because I think I've gotten a lot better than I was 5 years ago. But like for most humans, that negative stuff hits harder than the positive stuff, which is sad, but it's the reality. And so the negative self-talk, all that, it's like the biggest journey that we all have to go on is trying to get through that deep founded fear of rejection or not being enough that we all have, that these negative things people say will often just cut us to the core in ways that are not only not accurate, but deeply unhelpful.
Mhm. Did you ever find during your training, I know that when I was training for the Ironman, I haven't done one yet.
Yeah.
Back when I was about 21-ish, I started training and building up my
Yeah.
endurance, doing the different challenges, individually, did the bike,
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
I found that, I was in college at that time, and I found that those negative things that were in my mind actually became so powerful once I sort of established the right physical foundation, where it's like it stops being the pain in your body that prevents you, but it's really the
Yeah.
pain
Yeah.
in of just
Yeah.
pushing through things. Did you ever find that those negative things were able to be used as power when you were
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Definitely. I mean, look, certainly can be motivated by haters and can be motivated by negative thoughts. If you can channel them that way, hell yeah, that's awesome, right? It's just sometimes people can't. I certainly was able to often. And I think both in the Ironman and both in a lot of business moments, I have definitely been motivated by any combination of people who told me I can't, or that they didn't believe in me, or people who kind of like would subtly talk behind my back in the day, that they thought what I was doing was stupid and all that. Like that's definitely motivating to me. And now I'm at a point where like I haven't fully made it yet, but there's certainly some evidence and points on the board that would indicate that like I was at least right to take the swings that I took back then and now. And the thing I'm working through is it is not at a point now where I just want to rub it in their faces. It's more about like trying to get to a place, and I'm pretty close to, where it's like that level of actual hating that someone's doing and that level of negativity that other people are spreading, i.e., if someone is seeing someone else pursue something that they find meaningful and spending time in their day talking about it, hating on it, talking shit behind their back or making fun of them for it, it's pretty sad. It really is, right? Like again, as long as someone's doing something that they find interesting or that they believe in, you can think that they're wrong. You can think that they're not on the right path, but to actively bring negativity to them, to make fun of them or talk shit, it's just like, it's so sad to me. And now I'm at a point where I can actually see it as a more sad thing, where I'm just like, hey, even if I see people today, I'm in the business world, right? And so that's, most of my friends and people around me on a day-to-day basis are pursuing businesses. But if I see someone I went to college with, or I see someone I went to high school with, or even just like a friend of a friend, and I see that they're like giving a real swing at something, no matter what it is, they're opening an art studio, they're going to try to be a musician, and they're like doing it. It's like, that's amazing. Like, that's so cool. Good for you. Like, it's really awesome. And I think there's a lot of people out there that, probably largely driven by their own security, would see someone taking a swing, really going for it, no matter what it is, and be like, that's stupid. That's lame. That's pathetic. Look at this idiot. And it's like, no, you gotta, whatever we need to do as men, as women, as humans, as a society, to like cut that shit out, we need to do it, because it's so unproductive and it's so sad and negative, and I don't believe in it.
Yeah.
So whenever I see instances of that, I try to cut it. I'm like, what, good for them. It's amazing. I support, I encourage. I think it's very cool.
Powerfully spoken. And I can sense that, for people that have listened to the full length of this conversation so far, can start to really build that framework of just go do it. Get
Yeah,
out there. Just
totally,
go desire to be number one and work hard.
totally, totally agree.
So let's now talk about that part which we mentioned around navigating the system itself. So I
Yeah,
didn't say this earlier, but when those, operational or financial focused managers came in after my
yeah,
good hiring
yeah,
school, then the best thing I did was not listen to them. In fact, so I went and sat down at my desk and I just had a question. And I'm like, this guy built the business. Why don't I go ask him? And he was sitting there on the phone. And I just walked up and I said, hey, I'm really curious about this specific thing. And it blew him away.
yeah,
And ever since that moment, maybe similar to the Michael thing, where you
yeah,
just were like, hey, I'm a really well-meaning person, which most people are, and I want to learn, I want to be better. How did you do this? How should I do this better?
yeah.
And that actually catapulted me in that organization, because he, took me under his wing
Right,
in that sense. So
right.
how do people, approach navigating the system effectively in their own lives and identifying the right players and people that they should be associating with? so they can grow in their career?
That's a good question. I think one overall principle that people should follow is follow the energy, right? Like, and that doesn't necessarily mean follow your passions blindly, right? Like, I think if your ambition is squarely to make money and that's deeply important to you, and you have a passion for something that's unrelated to making money, or it's going to be hard to do so, i.e. pottery. It's not to say you can't make money in pottery, but like, there's a good argument for find a job that you like enough that can make you real money and build a hell of a pottery business on the side and have a balanced life. Right? Or you can just go all in on pottery. That's cool too. It's like harder. But I think follow the energy has always served me well, right? Like whether with people and with concepts, just walking down the path that tends to pull you seems to be a good framework. It's always served me decently well. So if I meet someone and I like their energy and I find them impressive and inspirational, trying to just spend more time around them, whatever that takes. But a lot of my mentors that I found early, I picked them and they picked me out of like pools of plenty of people, right? I have a number. When I was first an intern at Loeb, there was a number of CEOs at the organization at that time who were running companies. And there was really only one or two that I still stay in touch with, one of which in particular is still a very close mentor and friend of mine. And the real thread of why I got close with him, and I think vice versa, was I just liked his energy. I found him interesting. I found him nice. I found him to be motivating and inspiring. And I didn't feel that way about the other CEOs, to be quite frank. So I just wanted to follow this guy in particular and spend more time with him. So when I was 17 or 18, working in this office, he'd be there early or late, and I would just go talk to him. Eventually got closer, asked him what he was working on, just genuine curiosity of like, whatever I need to do to be more around this person and learn more, I'm in. Because when I'm around them, it feels good, it feels positive, it feels light, I feel hope, I feel energized, I feel inspired. Follow that path. And now, we still go visit his family once a year, still very close. I talked to him the other day, and that's not the same for most other CEOs. So I think following the energy is a good framework. And then I think there's also some, for most people, there's probably whatever business and industry you want to be in. If you're a young, ambitious person, you can find 10 to 15 people who are in and around the life you think you want to live or the life you think you want to achieve. I.e., if you are a undergrad in college and you think that one day you want to run a technology company, I guarantee you can probably find yourself 15 minutes at some point in the next year with at least 10 or 15 tech founders to learn from them, ask from them. And I bet you, if you have 15 conversations, one of those 15 is going to be someone who you feel motivated, inspired by, and want to spend more time with. And then the question is, how do you convince them and convince yourself that that is a worthy use of their time? The answer will often be showing them your curiosity and willingness to work hard so that they're going to see something in you that they saw in themselves, want to invest more in you, want to give you time, and eventually maybe give you an opportunity.
Outstanding. Yeah, that's a masterclass right there, honestly, for anyone, because there's so much advice that seems technical or tactical in that case that is not, it's superficial compared to what you just laid out, right? That really gets to the heart of it. You put yourself in the right room with the right people, be a well-meaning person, and just go for it. So
right, exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about the alcohol industry. Let's start looking at top shelf ventures.
Sure.
To help people get an understanding of maybe the recent, or what is ever the most relevant history of the alcohol industry that they should understand. Maybe they don't. And then really what you're seeing looking forward.
Yeah.
The investments that you made listed out, and a host of other questions. So we're going to really focus in here, which I know that you love it. So perfect.
Yeah. So brief history on the alcohol industry, because I think it's important people understand how this multi-trillion-dollar industry actually works, and specifically works in America. Booze has always been a deeply popular substance and pastime for Americans. And obviously, about 100 years ago, the United States government outlawed it on a federal level in this thing called prohibition. And Americans were so upset by this prohibition thing and so clearly showed that they craved and wanted alcohol to be a part of their culture legally that the government eventually obviously repealed it and put in place a series of state and federal laws that are now called the three-tier system. And the three-tier system is the governing system for how alcohol operates in the United States. You have retailers, you have distributors, and you have manufacturers. And so it's important to note for most people who may be unaware about how alcohol works, with some exception, but for the most part, anytime you've ever bought alcohol, you have probably never bought it directly from the person or company who made it. I.e., if Noah in New York City wants to go buy a bottle of tequila, I'm not going to the tequila store and I'm not going to the Casamigos store. I'm going to the local liquor store. The reason I'm going to the local liquor store is because New York specifically has a bunch of laws about who can have liquor licenses, who's able to have them, who's able to sell alcohol. So I go to a local liquor store in New York and I buy a bottle Don Julio from, Dandy's Wine and Spirits in Brooklyn. Dandy's Wine and Spirits has not bought that bottle from Don Julio they bought it from Empire Merchants, right? Or Southern Glazers or Breakthrough Beverage or RNDC or O-Pee-Chee. They bought it from a licensed distributor. The licensed distributor has bought that product from Don Julio directly. Now, that's not unsimilar to how most manufacturer distribution retail systems work in other types of industries across the US. The difference in alcohol is that it's federally mandated, right? So you have to buy it through that system. And so it's created this complex web of interstate and national laws on the federal and state level and governing bodies and all sorts of different systems that dictate how alcohol can and cannot be sold. And you have, as a result of this, 100 years later, post-prohibition, a complicated system that most, when they try to understand it, consider to be very, very complicated. It is complicated, but it's not impossible. The system is filled with lots of good people who generally want to work well together. And most importantly, if you are able to figure out how to navigate that system, the nuances of it, there is asymmetry and opportunity everywhere. And so my firm that we started is squarely focused on capitalizing on the opportunities, broadly speaking, within this multi-trillion-dollar industry that continues to churn out unbelievable profits, amazing products, has amazing people, and importantly, has this thing called alcohol that, whether or not the media would agree and like to admit, will always be a very important and essential part of American and global culture. So that's the long and short of how I think about the industry right now. I'll pause there. Do you want me to go into any of that more specifically, or?
Yeah. So and this might be like 1-2 steps ahead,
Sure.
but as I was driving here, I was thinking about, how, so if you're investing in these earlier stage companies, or we'll talk about some of them, they're at the creator of the product. And as these companies grow, do they seek to build out their own distribution network then? Or is that something that, right, is that a path that most take, few take? I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Like, how do they descend down the value chain down to that retail level?
Any alcohol brand that wants to scale in some capacity has to build out their own distribution. The difference is that they're not actually running that distribution themselves. So they have to be, almost always, some exceptions, but almost always, they have to be in partnership with one or many actual independently licensed distributors and wholesalers of that product, right? The difference is how much that supplier, the manufacturer, the one who makes the product, actually has, for lack of a better word, their tentacles, staff, and influence, and time, and resources, et cetera, within that distributor, right? Perfect example, a large distributor, they're going to give time and attention to the brands that they believe can make them the most money, because this is a capitalist system and meritocracy, and that's generally what they should do. So the question becomes, for early stage brands, how do you get yourself the time of day within the one or many distributors that you're running, right? Where if you're a tequila company and a distributor that's repping you already has 3 tequilas, more maybe, how do you make sure that they pay attention to you? And the way you do that is by any combination of relentless execution, good staff, incentives, riding along with them, spending time with them, getting them to believe in you, and most importantly, making sure that when the distributor actually sells the product to the retailer, customers buy it off the shelf, right? Money talks, results talk, and velocity is really the hero metric in this industry. So any brand eventually will need to have some very good system by which they manage their distributor relationships, support their distributors across the board, and ensure through a variety of strategic and tactical mechanisms that when the distributor buys it and sells it to a retailer, customers are there to buy it off the shelf. Because if customers are buying the product, everything else will take care of itself, right? Customer is king, velocity is the hero metric. The only thing that matters in this entire value chain is, are the manufacturers making something that the customers want? And if that happens, the rest of the messy stuff in the middle can generally be figured out.
And are there other parallel industries that, like, let's to speak to venture capital,
Sure.
operational frameworks that apply or exist in other industries that, as somebody who's in tech,
Yeah.
better understand the way this industry really functions as well?
Look, any industry that's looking at startups and growing businesses from an early stage to eventually much later is always searching for product market fit, right? That's the king, right? Product market fit is a more broad strokes version of saying, do the customers like what you are making? And is there an economic model that can support that continuing to scale itself and support itself, right? Often in partnership with venture capital partners or private equity partners who can support that growth. But eventually, the math needs to make sense. And most importantly, customers need to buy the thing, right? So if you're starting a B2B SaaS company, the equivalent is like, do you have a product that you can make for cheap enough and sell for enough money that people will actually like and use to continue to buy it, right? That's the equivalent. If it's a consumer app, the question is, have you built an app that is compelling enough that people will actually try it and download it? Do you have a good enough funnel and go-to-market strategy and marketing engine to get people to try your thing? And is the thing good enough that they come back and buy it again, right? This is just simple business 101. If it's a services business, is your offering priced right to be competitive? And do you have a mechanism to acquire customers and keep them in your system and keep paying them? Or is it expensive enough that a one-time purchase is enough, right? It's all just the fundamentals of business, which is like supply and demand, cost, margin. How much does it take you to make it? How much can you sell it for? How much does it cost you to run it? And so in alcohol, it's no different. I think a lot of people in booze get confused in thinking that the hero end game is just to get their distributors to like them. That is deeply important because your distributors are the path to the retailer, who's the path to the consumer. But the real thing that matters in alcohol and in any CPG is whether or not the customers like what you have, right? If customers are craving the item that you have and that you are making, you are going to have retailers and distributors who will be thrilled to work with you. The challenge in alcohol and the opportunity as we see it is that you can't overlook any of them, right? Like you can't just pay attention to the consumer and think, oh, distributors don't matter. They do. You can't just pay attention to your distributor and think, if I sign a bunch of distributors, the product's going to sell itself. It's not, right? Sometimes it does, but it's not. You have to be paying attention to all of the tiers. And the best businesses that can do this right at the early stages will be rewarded by generally really good businesses.
And at what point across your three investments on average do you typically invest? So there's Grazi, Sunboy, GRATSI, which we'll talk about, will include probably some detail. And then the long drink.
Yeah. So we have many more investments than the ones listed on my LinkedIn. Those are just the ones that I'm either on the board of or personally invested into. Long Drink, Personal, Grazi, and Sunboy I'm on the board of, but there's several more businesses in the Top Shelf portfolio that I'm happy to talk more about.
Right.
Our general entry point for these businesses, with exception, is when they're doing, usually less than $1 million. So our model is to find, look, in alcohol, there are hundreds, if not thousands of brands that launch every single year. Most of them will fail or at least not do very well. Some of them will do okay. Some will do great. And there's a few every year or cycle that will be outliers, right? That will have such high product market fit, potential, categorical timing in the market, good founding teams, that they will eventually become the ones from that cycle and that vintage year that go on to be multi-$100 million or billion-dollar companies. It's very hard to find those businesses, but when you do, and if you're right, you will often be rewarded by being early in something that will eventually become a household name, or at the very least, scaled across America, right? So that's our model. We like the ones that are $1 million and below in revenue, that are showing product market fit at the early stages that can eventually scale across the country. We at Top Shelf can help them navigate and potentially avoid some of the pitfalls that brands with high potential make along the way. But that's usually where we look to enter, right? Grazi, Long Drink, and Sunboy, just to take those three examples because you brought them up. Our entry point for all of them was well below $1 million in revenue. And, Long Drink is probably at hundreds of millions in revenue now. Grazi will do 55 million plus this year in revenue 2 years after we invested. Sunboy's 3x twice in a row in 2 years, year over year, and they're doing fantastic. And so that's generally the game, but it's hard to do that, right? Most booze brands will not make it off the starting line, much less pass $1 million in revenue.
And what are the valuation metrics that typically apply for these companies? So if you're getting in that early, is it, what does that look like?
Well, it depends on the market and it depends on the timing. Top Shelf has our own entry prices that we try to negotiate, but I can tell you that in alcohol, when they grow, the revenue multiples on acquisition can be anywhere from 3 to 4x revenue to, at the highest end, 20x plus, right? So it just depends on the market cycle and how quickly the brand is growing. But the reason that happens is because the large manufacturers, Diageo, Pernod Ricard, AB InBev, Molson Coors, et cetera, These are conglomerates that have unbelievable scale and ability to drop COGS on their products. And most importantly, the ability to scale something that is working rapidly across the country. So if there's a business that's doing $10 million in revenue, I'm using easy numbers here for reference. There's a business that's doing $10 million a year in revenue in a few states, but they're crushing and they're growing like crazy and consumers are maniacal for it. And they have a repeatable formula that is clearly working to acquire and keep new customers. If Diageo or Pernod or Constellation or AB buys that company for $100 million, they will very quickly make that back, not only in potentially the market cap implications, but more importantly, in how quickly they're going to scale the product across the country to 50 states, right? And so the math just becomes, how valuable is it to have this customer base that this new business has recruited to me? And it often, for businesses that trade on share of wallet and their ability to have a customer be loyal to their brand family, the answer is quite a lot.
Interesting. Very interesting. Now, let's talk about Sunboy in particular. I like that one.
That's a great brand. Yeah.
That's a recent investment.
We invested for the first time in 2023, and later last year we doubled down a bit. So recent-ish, it was top shelf fund one investment. Yeah.
So with that coconut water infused, how are you seeing, the creativity let's really focus on that creating demand piece.
Yeah.
The companies that you've seen that have done it successfully. So back when I was like 20 or 21, the first thing I wanted to do when I got out of college was start a drink company, actually. So I put together a product, formulated a beverage, got it patented, everything like that. But, and did, you're literally mixing up in a kitchen or something like that. So what are the stories that you've seen with your co's and how they've done that early stage demand generation and, product creation and things like that?
Sunboy has a cool story. The two founders, Luke and Yair, actually started a literal coconut business where they were doing corporate parties and they would bring actual coconuts to the party and engrave them or press them with the logo. So they would work with Google and Facebook and Twitch and all these companies for their corporate parties. People would get to drink, rum and coconut juice out of an actual coconut that said Twitch on it. And that thing was working. And more importantly, it was showing them that people really liked this coconut culture. The thing just had some viral nature to it. And like any good entrepreneurs, their question was, okay, how do we take this and make it more scalable, right? We can only peddle so many coconuts to corporate parties in a year. How can we make something that's going to be able to be sold when we're sleeping? And they said, we should make a spiked coconut water, which really at the time that they thought of it was the first of its kind and still is one of the first types in that category. And so they started to formulate a spiked coconut water, and credit to them for creating good brand universe. They came up with a killer packaging, a great name, and a good ethos for the brand that just kind of inherently has this pull and interest to it that looks like something that you should see on every shelf. And, they started in New York, which was probably in hindsight for them tough because New York is only warm a few months a year, right? Sunboy is a very tropical-y type of product. You'd think it makes a ton of sense in Florida, California, but they started in New York where it's hard. And started peddling coconut water, but the thing just worked, right? Trader Joe's loved it and Whole Foods loved it and their early accounts loved it. My partner Jason's business at the time was one of their first distributors. And so they just made something out of nothing and proved that consumers who tried it loved it, right? I remember the first time I actually tried the product, I liked it so much that I went out of my way to go buy it again that night. And intuitively in my brain, that's one of the anecdotal signals that a brand has something powerful. If the liquid or package or sentiment or experience with the product is so good that I'm willing to go out of my way to buy that product, it's usually a pretty bullish sign that the brand has legs.
Especially imagine, the experiences that are being created around those parties.
Totally.
You to really focus, and you mentioned the word experience there and demand. It's, hey, it's your corporate party. You get a nice coconut. It's got a rum and coke in there. I mean, that's special experience versus, just any other bottle of alcohol, right?
Totally.
Creativity.
Totally.
And also I think, the creativity of the beverage itself, because, you're replenishing those electrolytes.
Yeah.
Extremely hydrating. So you mentioned in our initial conversation, Fortaleza. So you are our Total Wine over here, and they did not have it. And I learned the liquor laws in Minnesota, apparently we cannot buy Fortaleza.
Is that true?
I was going to ask you. I thought you might know. That's what
I don't know. I don't know the specific law, admittedly, that would prevent a Total Wine in Minnesota from buying Fortaleza, but I know that Fortaleza is one of the highest demand. I think they're usually on allocate. Really good product. People love it. It's cool amongst both bartenders, people in the know and beyond. So if you can get your hands on some and I'll see what I can do, it's really good.
That would be great. Fantastic. And then one thing that came out recently, I think you had a post about this, was just the tariffs that
Mhm.
are potentially being proposed. And you're thinking that some of these larger conglomerates are going to be able to get around it. Perhaps is that, they'll ship in, let's say it's tequila, they'll ship in their agave, take the tax on the agave or the tariff, and then they'll, have their distillation or production facility in the United States. What are your thoughts on that? And just some of the other effects that are going to be hitting or could hit the alcohol industry?
The tariff thing is real, but I have a sneaking suspicion the booze business will find a way to navigate it effectively. I just have a hard time believing that at the scale of tequila, both Mexico and the US consumer will be willing to accept 25% haircut or price premium on it. Just doesn't, I don't think it's going to happen. Maybe more modest than that, but I don't think that's real. I think there are certainly some short-term headwinds facing the business and the industry that I think are being described or miscategorized as systemic issues, but are more so just natural cycles, right? Over COVID, people drank like fish. People were at home and liquor store sales, et cetera, hit unprecedented all-time highs, specifically from the baseline that they were at the year before, right? Alcohol sales have been growing modestly for the past 30, 40, 50 years. And then over COVID, they spiked like crazy, right? A huge delta. And because what I mentioned, the three-tier system, consumers bought more from retailers, so retailers bought more from distributors, so distributors bought more from manufacturers, so manufacturers made more and then projected more because that's how they project to the market. And
Mm.
so Wall Street and the market was expecting more growth, and then COVID ended, lockdowns ended, people went back outside. I think a big portion of that was people started to crave more healthy lifestyle, largely as a short-term kind of rebound bullwhip effect from being so trapped inside. So saunas got huge, cold plunges, run clubs got huge, all this stuff that's in longevity. I think all that stuff is real and has legs, but it's not systemic human shift. This is just how humans behave. We're cyclical creatures. We like one thing one time, we like another thing another time, et cetera. But as a result of all that, alcohol sales have normalized back to where they were around 2019, right? Or a little bit higher than that. So they're actually still higher than they were in 2019. But you've had this kind of messy middle that has created crazy spikes and now crazy drops back to normal. And when you have crazy drops, unfortunately, it creates short-term pain and things like layoffs and things like distributors reporting that they have too much inventory and people are drinking less. They are drinking less. They're drinking less than they were during COVID, which was insane amounts. I think that's a healthy thing. So I think you have a lot of headlines that are not indicative of the reality in the news. I think there is a real argument and question as to whether or not people will drink the same way, right? I think in many ways that's a good conversation to have, right? I think binge drinking is probably not a good thing for most people. Drinking in moderation and drinking in a healthy way and drinking as a social tool and drinking to connect with people, I will generally kind of die on the hill that that's a net positive thing for people in America and certainly the world in general. I think there's some questions around like how will alcohol be consumed? Will the occasion shift? Will the style shift? And all those things to me are bullish signals because again, I'm in the business of capitalizing on opportunities in the space, right? So I'm not betting the farm that people will drink the same way that they drank 25 years ago. I'm betting the farm that alcohol will continue to be an important part of culture and that there's going to be ways to make money within it. And I think that's pretty hard to argue.
Definitely. And this reminds me of a book. It's called The Fifth Discipline. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
So it's one of the original texts on, they call it the learning organization, but also systems thinking in general. And the example that they use is a liquor store that all of a sudden, a bunch of kids start coming in, obviously of age, to purchase a specific kind of beer because it was in a music video. And so they do. And they're selling more and more and more cases. But the way that their business works is they're on a, 3 to 4 week lead time. So what happens is they come in, the kids come in, the demand for this particular beer increases, it sells out, the kids come in, it's not there. And so then they go to their distributor and say, hey, we need 20 cases.
Yep.
Normally we get
Yep.
5, we need 20. And then that distributor goes to the manufacturer and says, hey, because they have that across 16 different locations. Now all of a sudden,
Perfect.
instead of 300, now hey, we need 900. And then, based off that lead time, things cascade down and flow. And all of a sudden, now there's a gloat there's a bloat because 6 months later, the music video isn't as hot. The demand decreases, and all of a sudden, that distributor and the retailer have more of this. So it just reminded me of that key systems thinking example from that book. So anyone
Great
that's
example.
that.
Spot on. Spot on.
And then you, as you're explaining, these investments, having those relationships with the distributors, right? Because the analytics company that you worked at was particularly with distributors or
Mostly retailers, but we know some
retailers.
distributors too. Yeah.
So you know the game, you know how, right, the ins and outs of how that part works. And then, as we look forward here, talked about, culture's effect on society. What are some of the other, the common themes that will be hitting the alcohol industry in particular, different types of innovation. Let's look at that. One that comes up in my mind, and I wanted to ask you about this is you look at the THC beverages, and obviously it's a
Mhm.
different market, but do you
Yeah.
see similarities in that, or are there distinct differences in the way that that's going to be executed on?
I think THC beverages are interesting, and I think hemp-derived THC is particularly interesting, largely because the regulatory environment for traditional cannabis is a bit complicated. Let's put it that. So I think hemp-derived THC is actually a really interesting market. And I specifically believe drinkable THC has a lot of legs to it. I think there's a lot of businesses out there right now that are proving that people actually like these beverages and want them. I don't think it's as big a market as alcohol, but I do think it has a huge ceiling. So we're particularly interested in that. We're trying to see what the regulatory environment's going to look like, but we're likely to make a couple bets in that market in the next year, maybe less. The real reason I like that space on the most macro level is that I think any beverage that is going to achieve any of the same business fundamentals as alcohol, meaning it is drank consistently, people like a lot of it, part of people's lives, it's habitual, it's ritualistic, it's embedded into culture. Anything that will achieve that will need to give people a feeling, right? So I think non-alc has some interesting legs. I think it's had an interesting last few years. I think it will continue to slowly grow as a portion of, for the very sober curious or people who fully want to cut out alcohol or on cocktail menus. I think it will continue to be a part of culture in modest ways. I don't think it's some massive revolution that's going to change how people drink alcohol. Non-alc beer has some legs to it. I think there's interesting moment there for how people can maybe want to crush a beer that doesn't have alcohol in it. So like we're looking at the space. I just don't think it's nearly as big a market as alcohol. And the main reason for all this is that I think for anything to truly compete with alcohol or to truly get to any level of scale, it will need to give people a feeling. It needs to have an effect on them, right? If you drink a THC beverage, you feel something. It will socially lubricate you. If you drink a couple drinks, you feel something. It will socially lubricate you. If you drink non-alc, it's nice because you're at the bar and you don't feel left out. But like that, to me, that's not actually a physical experience enough to really give it legs to become tens and tens of billions of dollars of market share. It's not to say you can't make money in those other spaces. I just don't think the opportunity is as big. But hemp-derived THC specifically, psychedelics eventually, some more of these psychoactive things that have effects on you, specifically ones that can have some positive health impacts, super interesting. I'm interested in them generally. They're just the regulatory and commercial landscape is not quite baked enough yet to be full all in from an investment perspective, but certainly worth exploring, staying close to. And I think we'll probably make some investments.
And one thing I've noticed about that industry in particular is just it's very homegrown as of right now. You go again, Total Wine or wherever anyone
Yeah.
shops for those drinks in combination.
Yeah.
Um, the selection is just massive. Obviously, there's a huge
Totally.
in alcohol, but there's just so
Yeah.
many.
You're
But
in, you're in
getting it,
Minnesota, right?
yes,
So that's THC central. There's THC everywhere at those stores, right?
yep, exactly. So 2025, it just became legal. So they legalized it
Correct.
in 2024-ish or 22,
Right.
late
Right.
2023, and then there was the regulatory period where they're doing whatever they do. I have no idea.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah, now we have the drinks all over the place. So
And it looks like it's selling like crazy, right?
it definitely is. And I had a friend just call me up, and he was on the way home, and he's like, "Hey, this guy was just outside this store, and he was selling these drinks that he made." And it was like this guy just posted up and said, "Hey, I made this myself," and it was
That's
nice and
cool.
well
That's cool.
packaged.
Yeah.
So it's
I
cool
think
to
it's
see
great.
that innovation.
I think it's great. And the other thing, I think a lot of people get confused about how I talk online about alcohol versus non-alcohol, et cetera. I have nothing against anything outside of the news world. I just think there's a lot of headlines and I think a lot of sentiment and rhetoric that indicate something that's just flagrantly not true, right? Like I think there's certainly some cohorts of people that are exploring their relationship with alcohol. I think that's a good thing. But there's these arguments being made that alcohol as an industry is systemically dying. And I'm just like, you can't in good faith say that. It's just not true, right? Like,
Mhm.
it's not dying. You have to remember people literally made the United States government change the laws when they tried to tell us we couldn't drink. It just doesn't hold water to think that the industry has some systemic challenge. And frankly, if any of these other types of drinks or beverages are going to go mainstream, hemp-derived THC, even non-alc, NA beer, psychedelic, like they're probably going to need to use the alcohol industry's rails and frameworks to get there. So if anything, those other types of businesses should be leaning into how do they get closer to alcohol from a regulatory perspective, because that is the actual ticket to being sort of an ironclad business and business model that will remain for decades.
Mm. And yeah, I think that's in our initial conversation we talked about the positive example of utilization and how on a cultural
Yeah.
and societal and the social level,
Yeah.
uh, how effective alcohol is at getting people to open up and just have a good time, have a good conversation
Yeah.
on things like that. And you've mentioned that with your training, when you're training for the Ironman, how
Yeah.
it helped you. So just to paint a short or positive example for people and
Yeah.
effective and supportive usage, what do you think about that?
I think alcohol in moderation can and often is a net positive. I think alcohol, sorry, I think alcohol in moderation is generally a net positive on people's lives. And I
Mm,
think almost without exception, as long as they know how to consume it the right way and they don't have addiction problems and all that. But when I was training for the Ironman, the ability to have a drink with friends once or twice a week or when I needed it was a massively accretive and helpful tool for me to get through this brutal training, right? Like, I have to remember when you're training for an Ironman, dozens of hours a week, right? Conservatively, that you need to spend in the pool, on a bike, running, etc. And that will drain you not only physically, but emotionally. You're just like, I had been staring at this stupid screen on my bike trader for 6 hours now. All I want to recharge my social battery to wake up tomorrow and run half marathon, and then get on the bike again, is to let loose a little bit.
mm,
And, I think there was for the first month or so, I tried to just be like cold turkey and like, I would finish my training, sit, watch a movie, go to bed, wake up, train. I was miserable. It sucked. I hated every minute of it. The training sucked. I resented it. And then I started being like, all right, what if I just introduce on like a Saturday night or a Tuesday night after a long trip, a couple of glasses of wine with my girlfriend or go out with friends and have some drinks? And it changed everything because I was like resetting my battery. I was like coming back to neutral. And I think there's a lot of people that are burning themselves out trying to pursue this perfection of full human biological hacking and symbiosis in a way that I just don't think is actually how we were meant to live, right? Like full, perfect, 100% calibration, 100% of the time, I actually don't think is that healthy. Meaning, if all you do is eat, work, sleep, sauna, cold plunge, run, train, etc., and you never let yourself experience the texture of life, I don't think that's healthy, right? I'm not saying it can't be healthy overall, but I think a true life with actual fabric and texture, and one that in 100-year window you're going to look back on and be like, I did that right, is not just purely about optimizing in every given moment. I say all that to say, I think a good chunk of people who are focused so heavily on optimizing themselves would be well suited to, whether it's once a week, once a month, etc., let themselves cut loose. And I think a couple drinks would serve them really damn well.
mm. And as we're looking forward into your, career that's ahead of you, what is the true impact that you want to leave with people as we wrap up this interview as well?
That's a big question. I
It
appreciate
is.
you asking. Let me think on it for a sec. I feel pretty passionate and motivated by the notion of blazing my own path. I think creating a life that is meaningful to me and one that is successful on the terms that I define, any combination of freedom to do what I want, time to spend with people that I love, time working on things with people that I love, the financial freedom and security to basically do what I want. And most importantly, I think being a positive impact on the people around me. I think that's a life that is not necessarily achieved by following conventional paths. And I'm not saying all this is easy, but the ability and the luxury to be able to pursue a life that I'm building for myself with amazing people that are my business partners and friends and family, very motivating to me. And so blazing my own path, and one that certainly gives me the ability to live the life that I want on my terms. And importantly, hopefully has a positive impact on those around me. That's important and very motivating to me. And if I can start to continue to get my voice and message and path and journey heard by larger swaths of people, that I'm showing and influencing that you can be on this journey. You're able to kind of do things on your own terms. You're able to, as an example, train for Ironmans and have a couple drinks. You're able to, build a real fund and invest in the alcohol space and also be healthy and happy, build a fund yourself, start your own business, et cetera, and still have some semblance of really good relationships with your friends and family and a decent head on your shoulders. I think all that's pretty motivating to me. So I hope when it's all said and done, I can leave a message of he blazed his own freaking path. He did it on his terms. He left a positive weight for the people around him. He proved to other people, and most importantly himself, that the life of his dreams was not only achievable, but even more so. And he did it his way. So that type of thing is motivating.
Well, you're leaving that impact on me, and I know that everybody who
Thanks,
listens to
brother.
this will have a lot of insights and opportunities for them to take action as they look forward. So, how should people get in contact with you, or should they look at Top Shelf Ventures, or how else can we support you? Follow you on social media?
Yeah, I mean, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. I think the username for all of them is Noah S. Friedman. So NOAHSFRIEDMAN, or just Google Noah Friedman or Noah Sanborn Friedman and you'll see me. But, LinkedIn, Twitter, and I'm starting to do more Instagram. I'm trying to get over the hump of letting myself just post business stuff there. That's the place to find me. So, follow me, DM me, say hi. Always love chatting with you.
Fantastic. And then one part to add, I take what you said is you feel it's a real life, right? That impact that you want to leave of just you can do it, live life on your own terms. You can have this and that, the genius at the end. So for everybody listening, thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe and share this content and go check out Noah. Support this man as he continues to grow and live an awesome life. So thank you guys, and we'll see you in the next interview. Hey everyone, thank you for watching this episode of Titans Up today. What did you learn from it? Make sure to drop a comment below with your most valuable insight so that other people can engage in the conversation around what this speaker brought to the table. And then on another front, make sure to subscribe so that every time we drop a new episode, you will be notified. And that way you can keep fueling your dreams and your brain with fresh insights which can help you along your journey and along your path to your goals. So thank you so much again, and I look forward to seeing you in the next interview.